Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to MusicForever, where today we're reviewing the new album from 3 Days Grace, Outsider. Now before starting this actual review today, I think it's important to address my history with this group, just generally where I was coming in terms of, my perspective in this group just before listening to this project. And back when I really started getting into music around like 2012, 2013, 3 Days Grace was a group that I did, hear a couple of their songs, and I did really like them. That was really before I started diving into albums in full, but I did enjoy a good amount of their songs then. And of course, when I started listening to the albums, I enjoyed those as well. However, in recent years, I've kind of drifted away from this band a bit, in part because I just don't really connect with it quite as much as maybe I used to back then, and also in part because of kind of the vocalist change they had prior to the release of their last album, Human, I believe that was the name of that album. And the new vocalist that they had, Matt Walsh, I didn't really care for him all that much. He kind of sounded like, a lesser version of the band's original vocalist, and kind of as a result, I felt like that last album kind of sounded like a B-rate version of like a normal 3 Days Grace album to some extent. I really didn't care for that last project at all. So, in recent years, I've kind of drifted away from this group to a degree. But I decided to check out this album anyway, because why not, I guess. And really, what is there to say about this project? Do I think it improves on the last album? Is it a return to form? Well, this album does fix some problems I had with the last project, but at the same time, I really don't think it manages to climb all that much higher than the last album. I'll start by saying that Matt Walsh, as a vocalist, has definitely found his place more in this group. That is one thing I noticed about this album, that he just sounds a bit more naturally put into this project. It doesn't quite sound as much like a lesser version of the first incarnation of this band, but it still does maybe to a slight degree. But he definitely comes into his own a bit more on this album, and his vocals for the most part sound good throughout this project. And he just, isn't really much of a weak point on his own here like he was, I felt, on the last project. So that's one improvement over the last project. And the lead single from this thing, The Mountain, is probably my favorite cut on this album overall. I think it's just a pretty decent song overall. I mean, there's nothing really all too spectacular about it. Lyrically, it's a bit, generic, I guess. But it is a catchy song. It's entertaining. It gets stuck in your head very easily. And overall, I think it's just a solid song overall. And like I said, in my own opinion, it's the best song on the album. Unfortunately, all the other tracks on here, that kind of means, didn't quite live up to how much I enjoyed The Mountain. They all kind of fell flat in one way or another. And I feel like the biggest problem with much of this album is the lyrics. There's so many instances of this album just throwing generic lyrics your way. I mentioned earlier that The Mountain had some more generic lyrics in it, but compared to a lot of the songs on this thing, The Mountain has, some of the most creative lyrics on the entire project. Just take the track I Am an Outsider, for example, the third track on this thing that immediately follows The Mountain. And by this point in the album, I was like, okay, I think there's a decent chance that this album could be pretty good, because the first cut on this thing that comes before The Mountain, Left, Right, Left, or something along those lines, I forgot the name of the track. Also, despite some, kind of awkward lyrics as well, I feel like it was probably my second favorite track on this thing overall. But then I Am an Outsider comes on, and this track just has the worst lyrics on the project overall, I think. As the title of the track might suggest to you, the track is kind of told from the perspective of, an outsider, but it's really just this outsider pointing out, like, the obvious. It's like, I'm an outsider, I don't care about the in crowd, and all that stuff. It's like, it's so painfully generic, like, there's nothing really to it. Like, why doesn't this outsider like the in crowd? Why is he on the outside? Like, there's nothing really given, no reasons given or anything like that. It's just the bare bones of, like, an outsider story, really. And I just feel like it's kind of pandering to, the kids that, feel like they're on the outside because they listen to real music with real instruments or something like that, when there's not really all that much depth to it at all. It's just really shallow and kind of gross overall with how, I feel almost manipulative it is in a sense to, appeal to that kind of demographic. But, yeah, it's just, it's kind of catchy, the song. I guess I'll give it that. It is kind of catchy, and that's the thing about a lot of these songs too. Sometimes even though they have not very good lyrics, the songs will still manage to be somewhat catchy at least, so that these bad lyrics just get stuck in your head real easily. Which maybe in further thought that's not a good thing, but typically I guess you could say catchiness is a good thing about this project. The track "Me Against You" is another one that just has painfully average and generic lyrics, and it's kind of disappointing considering the instrumental of this track is one of the more interesting ones on the project. There are a few moments on this thing where instrumentally it does manage to sound a bit more interesting and spice things up a bit more, but oftentimes it's these tracks that also have some of the more painful lyrics on this thing. Going back to the track I was just talking about, it's just this very generic story about, the narrator is kind of, I guess, squaring up with someone who they don't like for reasons. Like, he kind of says, like, that they put them down and stuff like that, but it's still, like, really generic. Like, I feel like you could take this song and apply it to almost any confrontation ever in the history of just humanity, and I think it could apply. It's just that generic, and once again, I can see why they may want to do that, so that lots of people can connect to the song to some degree. But I feel like it's just so painfully generic that there's really nothing interesting about it to latch onto. The track "The New Real" is another one that just has painfully generic and just awkward lyrics. I do like the sentiment behind this track, kind of talking about how some people just kind of fake their own happiness, or you just have a kind of fake exterior to them in order to seem better off than they actually are, and how that seems to be kind of becoming the new real, I guess, is what they're trying to get across here in the track, as opposed to being more genuine. But really, I feel like this track just kind of falls into a similar category as, like, "I'm an Outsider," with kind of trying to appeal to those people that just try so desperately to be an outsider, to be different out there, who just want to be, the realest of the real, I guess you could say. And I know what this track is trying to, I know what that is, because I used to be that person when I was younger, as much as I'd hate to admit it. But, as I've grown up, I realized just how, not good that was to some degree. So that's why when I hear tracks like this and "I Am an Outsider," I just kind of feel, kind of grossed out to some degree, because I feel like it's trying to appeal to people like that, like people who I used to be some period ago. And, me 5 years ago, 4 years ago maybe even, I would have eaten tracks like this and "I'm an Outsider" up, but nowadays, not so much. I just kind of feel like it's a bit manipulative. Not necessarily like that they're trying to be manipulative with these tracks. I want to make that clear. I'm not saying that the band is trying to be manipulative, but I feel like the way that the tracks kind of end up coming out, they just kind of end up seeming that way. And once again, I do like the sentiment behind this track, but I just feel like it's really just kind of a lyrical train wreck with how awkward it is and how kind of pandering it is. Outside of some of those tracks I just mentioned, the rest of the album is just pretty standard through and through. Some of the tracks maybe occasionally have some catchy moments to them, like I mentioned before, or they'll throw a kind of interesting instrumental part your way, but for the most part they don't really do that as much. That's all too interesting. You have your typical just aggressive track, you have your typical kind of slower, more emotional track. It just kind of does what it needs to do, I guess you could say. It does the standard stuff you would expect from a 3 Days Grace album, but it doesn't really excel in any of the categories all too much. And overall, as a result, the project just kind of feels a bit, uninteresting overall, I guess you could say. Like I said earlier, "The Mountain" I think is a pretty solid track. It's not anything super great or anything, but it is an enjoyable song for what it is. But I feel like just the rest of these songs on here either suffer from bad lyrics, or in some cases just average, uninteresting lyrics, or just pretty average, uninteresting instrumentals paired with the lyrics. It's not a project that really invites me to listen to it over and over again, just because there's not all too much going on. Like I said, the only strong suit throughout this project is, some catchy moments that appear pretty frequently throughout it, but even that's not enough to save some of these tracks. So overall, I feel like this project is a bit of an improvement over their last album. The band feels a bit more cohesive here on this project. But overall, I don't think the results, are anything all that special despite that. I really didn't care for this project all too much outside of "The Mountain," which I think is just, a pretty fun song for what it is. But, you know, 3-Day Grace fans out there, I recommend you check out this project because, like I said, I think it definitely does improve in some areas over their last album. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure if it stands up to some of the best material that they've put out in the past. But it's still worth a listen if you are a hardcore fan of this band. But outside of that, I would listen to The Mountain, and, you know, if you enjoy that track, maybe explore some of these other songs. But if not, it's not really worth diving into the rest of the album because I feel like The Mountain is the best that this album has to offer. But yeah, that's just my own opinion. If you really like this album, that's perfectly fine. In fact, if you do, leave it down in the comment section down below, your opinion on this project. I greatly appreciate seeing it. And while you're down there, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future album reviews and other music-related content. Thank you for watching, and stay golden.